Okay,
So,
so hi everyone. Thank you for being here for this session, talking about something I'm super passionate about, which is the future of the world and where are we headed. All of us have been caught in this weird world of change in the world since early last year. A lot has been happening. And amongst all things, we saw that AI really finally reaching a point that it could have insane amount of impact. The way LLMs have been developing and the way the access to them has turned universal, has opened a lot of different prospects for us, but also kind of a point we have reached that predicting future is pretty impossible. So here we are not necessarily going to predict future with a level of certainty because nobody can. But the goal is here, just let's think about it. Let's talk about it. I have asked our guest speakers to make sure we don't have a very agreeable conversation. I asked them to play devil advocate, even if there's like a fringe belief that they don't necessarily agree with it, but it's worthwhile to consider it, to bring it up. Again, the goal for today is just as a practice to be exposed to different thoughts and then kind of try to think ahead and what we are facing in the future. So I have a lot of thoughts that I have shared in many different settings. And one of them is, as we have LLMs development reaching a point that it's really easy to create our own automation agents, that we can automate a lot of tasks. We can create multi-agent that orchestrate between different agents of different LLMs to deliver a task. I've seen some of you in audience, I have had conversations with, you have been creating really cool stuff to do that for yourself, for your startups. Where are we headed? What would be the future of startup world? I have been talking a lot about the 3 founder unicorns, where the founders, super smart, super savvy founders get together and that automate the operations of their startups to the point that they do not need to hire. Hence, they do not need to raise as much fund. Hence, they are very nimble, very fast, very financially lean to reach tens of millions of dollars of revenue per year. Like, so the said unicorn status of $100 million revenue, maybe within 18 to 24 months. And this is something happening. On the side of this, I'm a big believer that this is gonna be the future. So we are having, Hadi and I had some training sessions. We had 3 of them so far. You're more than welcome to join if you're interested into how to do those. I'm gonna share the QR code later so you can scan and join. And right now, I'm gonna start by introducing our guest speakers. I will say just a brief line and then each of them will introduce themselves. So Hamza, I had the pleasure to meet a little while ago through another introduction of one of my our mutual friends that you have to talk to Hamza because you have a lot in common to share, and has been a senior research engineer at Google and then has been entrepreneur, and he teaches at Stanford, UCLA, and is like a really impressive background. Sharvil is one of my very good ex-Googler friends, and then he's one of the smartest people I've ever worked with. And he's also a founder of this super cool company called LMNT. They are in the text-to-speech world, and he has a lot of amazing opinions. And Hadi is also my dear friend. We met last year, and then he's one of those founders that uses these most extraordinary agents. He's like the guru in that sense of how to do it and how to use and create amazing stuff. With that said, Hadi, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
So I have a little bit of a different background. So I come from science, biochemistry, but I think it was around 2015 I started coding because I saw what's happening with AI, and I was doing protein crystallization, and then we had AlphaFold essentially solving protein structure. So I kind of realized that maybe I need to learn more stuff. I started playing with language models with first coding assistant like GitHub Copilot, and since then I've just started playing around with them, building stuff with them, and most often my purpose is automating my own workflow. but wherever I can share those and help other people do that too. Yeah.
Cool. Hey everyone, I'm Sharvil. So I guess I have a more traditional software engineering background. Started my first company when I was in my undergrad career out in Singapore. Then I moved to Canada, worked at Google for a number of years, met some incredible folks, built some consumer electronics, some successful, some not so successful. If anyone's heard of Google Glass, I was an engineering lead on one of those projects. And then I had a detour into venture capital for a little bit. And here I am, doing my second startup.
Awesome. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Hamza. I've lived a few lives. I wanted to be a doctor. I ended up marrying one. So
Close enough.
Close enough, right? So my half brain wants to be a doctor still. I come from a very traditional background, software engineering. Did a pivot, went to consulting. So I did consulting for a few years in the Middle East. And then I decided I did not like consulting. I can safely speak about that in Bay Area. And then I decided to go back, did another master's and worked with Walmart. So we were the team that figured out how to not recommend you a pink iPhone if you bought a blue iPhone. So I am that old. And because whenever you would buy something, it would just recommend you the same thing to buy. Okay. We fixed that, and then I helped build search engine at Walmart. Then I went to Google for a few years, worked on the now team called Gemini, which was assistant, which became Bard. I also teach a lot. I did a gig at Stanford. I continuously teach at UCLA, and there's an online platform called Maven. And then I run a startup called traversaal.ai. And our core job is to provide companies with the infra so that they can deploy large-scale applications without having to build them themselves. So we provide full stack SaaS products for them so that they can run all the fun stuff. Over to you.
Okay, so with that said, I mean, a little bit of my background, I traveled the world doing collecting degrees in different countries, different continents. So I've always wanted to understand how the world works. So I have a comprehensive engineering education. When I was at Google, I joined Google bright-eyed to learn how Google builds its amazing products. And soon enough, I learned Google has no idea. And then I ended up trying to figure it out and then kind of teaching Google how to do it. That was kind of product excellence program, which in simply said, I call it productization of technology and how to turn amazing technologies into products. So I'm always obsessed with understanding, figuring out how things work and kind of frameworking it, because that's how my brain works and how I understand. And probably this effort of understanding the world and the future is part of that. I want to, be a little bit ahead of the game to figure out what's the framework, how could we do? So with that said, what is your prediction of the future? Where are we headed? Considering, again, as I said, the LLMs have so much power. We have talked about, there are apps like Devon that you can talk to and they spit out an app. And whenever I talk about it, people say, oh, how good it is. And I'm like, it's the worst it ever will be. They're only going to get better. So in a future that we're going to have people being able to speak in plain English and have an app created, in a world that everything going to be automated, in a world that the barrier of entry going to be really, really almost non-existent, because up to now for innovation and creation, yes, coding skills was required and was an advantage. And thinking about, historical elements. So for example, cloud computing. Before cloud computing was really expensive, really hard to build in a startup. And then what did it do? After that, it was much easier, much cheaper. And it opened the floodgates of innovation to people that before that could not have imagined being a founder. And so much amazing ideas, amazing companies, and billions of dollars of wealth was generated. So now we are kind of at the same tipping point of new technology has hit the market. It is going to open floodgate of innovation. A lot of people who have no technical background could theoretically be the innovators of the future. So how do you see, where are we headed?
I start,
Go for it.
it will be a very different world if Trump wins in November. Right? So, but I feel like it's opening doors to a new version of the world, which will be very slow to pick up on. So it's almost like, hey, we've introduced flying cars, and very specific parts of the world will have access to that. Because conversational style of talking to machines has existed before, but it was not adapted. And then ChatGPT, they figured out how to make it work. And now conversational way of interacting with the company, with the website has becoming more and more important. I feel like there will be the companies that are able to get that infrastructure built out as soon as possible, they will start winning. So the one thing that will change is that there will be less advertising. I hope, I really hope there is less advertising and more focused, almost to the level of creepy, that this is exactly what you need. So I'll speak of the positive. You can take you can take the negative, so that we have a bit of a balance. But positively, I believe you will have access to information which is personalized to you, to the fact that you're like, oh, I've been waiting for this, just like Facebook does right now. Every other company will be able to do, or most of the companies will be able to do this. So positive, direct, personalized, hyper personalization that will help you find things that you're looking for without the effort that you make at this moment using Google or something like that.
You gonna go?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I do feel like this is sort of the story of technology, right? It's not, building AI is great, but it's not all that different from, for example, the internet or the information age. It's not all that different from the steam engine. It's not all that different from the printing press in some sense, right? We're constantly on this trajectory of let's build systems that increase productivity. That's what tooling is. That's what engineering is. That's what science leads to. And so I feel like this isn't actually all that different in some sense. It may feel like that because we're kind of experiencing this firsthand here in the Valley. But I don't see this as a fundamentally different thing. That said, I feel like there are a bunch of implications. One implication, I think, is there's going to be a new class of jobs created. These are not going to be ones that we can predict today, but there's certainly going to be a class of jobs that will cease existing. There will be a new class of jobs that will pop up. We talk a lot about, for example, prompt engineers. I would argue that prompt engineering is actually more like a bug in the system. Like this is just a poor product, and we'll get to a place where we don't actually need this. But you can imagine that there will be new classes of jobs that come into existence as a result of just having more complexity in the system. As we go through building more productive tools, individuals are empowered. So Sarah, you mentioned that you'll have these 3-person startups. Well, what that means to me is 3 people can handle the complexity of maybe 10 people or 30 people, whatever that factor is. And so if you can, with a small number of people, handle more complexity, you will build more complex systems. I mean, if we look at the world around us, everything like, concrete, these buildings, like everything that we construct is more complex than what came before. And I don't see that trend changing. So in that way, yeah, we'll have 3-person startups that are wildly successful, but we'll also have more effective, larger organizations as well.
Yeah. So Hadi, hold your thought on this topic I want to hear, but I want you to also, you and I had this conversation about how these LLMs going to help you. And for example, as one of the most talented developers I have ever met, I asked you about how does Copilot help you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so, my personal experience is that there are probably a lot of domain-specific programming languages. And these are, there's some random tool that does exactly what you need. But, it's written by like one person, it's poorly documented or not documented at all. And, in fairness, it is literally like one person on GitHub somewhere, right? So they're doing their best. But that makes it really difficult for someone like me to sort of jump in and start using that tool. But with something like a Copilot, it becomes very easy. Now I can actually wrangle that complexity. Now I can go and manage the system. I can bring in all these components that I couldn't bring in before because the documentation was poor, because it was buggy, because there were some other issues. And I can find the workarounds a whole heck of a lot faster and get to a place of productivity rather than just fighting the system. And so I think that's another example of just being able to build larger, more complex systems a lot faster. And that, to me, translates to productivity increase, but also leads, I think, to more interesting products at the other side.
Okay, so Hadi, what are your thoughts on where are we headed?
I think I always, especially because it's not my background, like computation or like building these models, not directly my background, I always look at from like the abstract level. And the way I understand these tools is that they take a text, like what it happens at the LLM's core is it just takes a text and gives out a new text. So I call this as text processing step. Sometimes I call it like text calculators. And then I look at the similar things like what typical calculators did for us. If you go search, you will see some of the mathematical problems that we had to do a lot of calculations. So we didn't have answers for them till we had computers. When we had computers, all of a sudden, we unlocked many of these questions that we had in math. And I think about this tool as a similar tool too. But in this case, it's going to be text processing. And for me, it's like, okay, what is text processing? What kind of tasks can be essentially break down to text processing steps? Like generating a report, like doing a research. Can we formulate these as these steps? Because at its core, these tools are just doing these steps one at a time. And now with Agentix platform, we see that they are coming together. So for me, it's identifying the type of the problems that they can solve and then compare them to something from history that we saw that transition. So that's typically how I try to see them.
Yeah, and I like, we worked on this like model of explaining the different level of calculator that they can help. And then if I recall correctly, is 99% of people use LLMs, OpenAI, ChatGPT, or whatnot, as just a simple calculator that does arithmetic, simple math. If you customize it or create your custom GPTs, you're like skipping and then going like to algebraic level. If you create your agents, you're like non-linear calculations. If you're creating multi-agents, you're linear, like and then so like the more complex ways you use these LLMs, it's like using that calculator. It's given to you with all these capability. Think about first time you saw a scientific calculator. So the calculator was the same. Like you had to figure out at what level to use it. Do you want to elaborate on that also?
Yeah, so like a lot of things for LLM, you just input a text. Like pretty much if you don't input a text to LLM, it doesn't work. But like that's like the typical notion that you give something to the LLM. So in that case, if you give like a text, like a PDF and a question, and that the LLM is trained on like Q&A kind of instruction, then essentially it does that. So I think about that as one type of a calculation. In math, we use like addition, subtraction, but now we can start to think about these kind of definition in the realms of text. Like maybe summarization is a text processing step. Maybe analogy is a text processing step. Like sometimes I do that a lot because I come from a different background. And then let's say I want to understand some of the concept from web development, which are not intuitive to me. Then I ask ChatGPT to put in an analogy from chemistries because I have a better understanding of chemistry. So that essentially becomes another text processing step. So that's typically how I try to approach these tools and kind of
Yeah.
think about where they will end up.
Thank you. So we heard from a couple of you that, and then I also mentioned it, like there's always historical precedents, and like thinking about history, it can help us to a greater extent to predict the future, because all these cycles are happening. And again, going back to cloud computing, when it happened, and every other innovation before that, there are like 3 layers of impact that they have. One is infrastructure. The other is like platform level, talking about the software development. And then the top layer is app development. And they're like kind of different layers of funnel. At the infrastructure, we have very few companies, usually the giants in conglomerate international companies that immediately take a position on that because they have super deep pockets. Think about cloud, AWS brought it out, and then, Microsoft and Google took over, Google being fashionably late, as always it is, but it has really deep pocket, throw tens of billions of dollars at it, and then took their market share. And then kind of platform level usually is like an afterthought after a lot of apps are created, and they bring them together and kind of create that platform for the users. And we saw this like perfectly play out in cloud, because the infrastructure offered a tool for innovation. And a lot of app levels used cloud as a tool that makes it easier and cheaper for them to develop. And then later on, a few very successful platforms were also created. And in my opinion, part of that applies to what we are seeing right now, and part of it doesn't. The part that, yes, infrastructure was created, and pretty much we all almost know who are the big players in infrastructure like layer. OpenAI, kind of created this breakthrough. Google, again, fashionably late, is figuring it out. OpenAI being part of Microsoft, and then Amazon, we are gonna pretty soon probably see what they do, and maybe within the next couple of years, 1 or 2 more companies might reach that. But when it comes to the application layer, there's one thing that is super challenging. So the first level of innovation that started happening last year, where a lot of these companies that were building a wrapper around one of these big LLMs. And last year I kept saying, when I was seeing billions of dollars going into investing in those companies, that this is insanity. And very simple logic, that if any of these founders that you are investing in and funding, with like the best of circumstances, they can break into $1 billion market, and that's usually the target for VCs to invest. What is going to stop the LLM companies to break into that market? Because this wrapper startup actually doesn't own the IP. What they have done, they have only de-risked that area and domain for the big companies. And then, they have such deep pockets, so many people, they can easily, like, $1 billion market is not a joke, right? So that people were not like listening really well. And then last year, by the even release of GPT-4, we saw many of those companies went belly up. Then there were like a few, it's like, this is going to be like a little sensitive. There were a few companies who were doing the foundational model of their own. And I'm like, I know some super smart founders who are capable of building really amazing foundational models. But again, what is stopping these big companies with like really deep resources to create that? And we have seen this year that, for example, ChatGPT again released the voice model and video and image and everything. So the part that it doesn't work is that, again, the cloud, the model worked perfectly, like everything behind it. We had infrastructure, we had app, and then platform. Here we have infrastructure, but anyone at the app level, when they want to create, at least this is my view, is what they need, if they're using generative AI as a tool, partially that is kind of the IP for the wrapper models. So they cannot be successful. And then we see they're like breaking down. If they're even trying to create the IP, probably they cannot be successful, because again, the infrastructure here is the IP. So I wonder where the innovation gonna happen. Obviously, I'm biased toward what I call generative AI enabled startups, meaning startups that literally use generative AI as a tool for automation and build whatever they're building. Even, I always say, even if what they're building is paper, as long as they automate the process and reduce the cost those are the successful companies of the future. And I'm very skeptical. And I think the market is still super volatile for creating a generative AI product. But I'd love to hear what your thought is. And Sharvil, with your big smile, you being one of the founders who are building an amazing foundation model for text-to-speech.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so first, I think I'd challenge this idea that infrastructure companies are settled. So I don't think that, you know, Google Cloud is doing good work, Amazon's doing good work, Microsoft's doing good work with Azure. I think we're in a moment where every business is up for grabs. And if you look at cloud computing, we're in a world where you're seeing startups, even here, just down the street on University, that are building GPU farms. We're finding GPU farms in Europe. We're finding, you know, Lambda Labs is a great company that's building lots of infrastructure for compute. You know, this was kind of unthinkable a few years ago. And that's, you know, they're basically nipping at the buds of, or at the heels of these larger companies. So now you're in this situation where even something that we considered established, like cloud compute, that model is being disrupted. And we're seeing essentially the entire technology stack from the silicon all the way up to end user experience being rewritten. So we're seeing new silicon, we have ASICs, we have everything from, you know, whether they're TPUs, whether they're Grok devices, Canara devices, like there's so many startups building ASICs for accelerated compute, both on the training side and on the inference side. That's great. Then you have companies that are building completely new languages and compilers for those languages. Some of these are happening at big tech. A lot of it is happening outside of big tech. And so, for example, just again, down the street, Modular is building a compiler and a hardware software ecosystem for AI. Would anyone go head to head with, you know, these established players in a different environment? Unlikely. But I think we're living through these really exciting times where, again, everything from the ground up is being rewritten. When it comes to models, think about every day, it feels like there's a new LLM from some company, whether it's Mistral, whether it's Databricks, whether it's, and of course, you know, there's the established players like OpenAI and Google and you know, a couple of others. But, you know, you have Anthropic, you have Cohere, you have so many LLM players. So I do still feel like everything in this world that we're living in is up for grabs. And it's just it's just opportunity. There's nothing that's settled. And what we considered settled is again, just up for grabs.
Do you guys want to add something to this?
I don't know, I think, again, like, definitely Sharvil's more in that space than me, but the way I think about this, again, from the language processing is that, like, there's the input, there's the LLM, and then there's the output. So I think we discussed about this many times, but for me, it feels that the input is going to be very important because it really defines the quality of the output, sometimes even better, more important than the LLM itself. And I think there is a bit of a trend that some of the data is already going behind the, you know, kind of paywall or some, you know, API connection. Like I used to be able to like search for people in LinkedIn from ChatGPT, but now if you do it, it doesn't, essentially there is no access from ChatGPT, even if the web browsing is active. So if LinkedIn is doing this, what other companies are going to do it? So it seems that the input that is going to essentially get into the LLM and become processed and give some form of an output, that it becomes more and more important, which has multiple sections in it. There are the custom instructions, so different people are building different types of custom instructions, workflows, but also the factual data. That also is very important. So
if I understand that correctly, what you mean is like LLMs are ubiquitously available, and if anybody can have access to the best of them. So the competitive edge is how you use them. And the way we use LLMs is what input we give them because the context is all that matters. And the people or companies or individuals who use them smartest, which is giving them the best instruction and best input, gonna be winners, whatever that means. Look at that. I agree that's a fact, right? We can't argue with that. What it means in what kind of product is a different thing. And this is taking advantage of existing LLM, not like building a foundational model. Do you guys agree with that?
In some sense, the cat's already out of the bag. The training data is already out there. So then it's a question of, okay, how do I connect with other systems, whether they're, your LinkedIn's or your Twitter's or whatever other walled garden. And that to me seems like an economics problem. It seems to me like a business problem, not so much a technology problem. And so as far as I'm concerned, the technology is at a place where you can do a whole heck of a lot. And we're already seeing that. Then it's a question of, okay, but like if everyone just puts up walls and says, sorry, you don't get access, like that's not a.
Let's actually dive into that. Like how, like that's a very likely possibility. That, in the last decade, everybody was saying data is the next gold or oil. And then, big companies were collecting all this data that they didn't know what to do. It was like, kind of like they couldn't not do it, but they were doing it, not knowing for what or how to use it. And now these generative AI models for the first time make it possible that you can feed this data, get like some actual usable action.
Yep.
So how would the world look like? Because so far, there's like the big companies that are already established and have a competitive advantage. They legally or illegally is like, a very gray area. It was not illegal because there was no law that was saying you cannot train the models, but we are like hitting a lot of morality clauses or, kind of actually legality of it is also being discussed for the first time. So when the big companies are saying, oh, you have to regulate, which is kind of like superficially is really nice of them, but also in another side of it, wanting to be cynical, it means regulate so other people cannot use the available information to compete with us, right? So where is the world going? So everything goes behind the walls, already a lot of media companies were arguing with Google that, you access our information, even for showing it on search results. And then, grab traffic from our website and such, just for showing. And now they're actually using that information. Like New York Times had this big lawsuit against OpenAI that, even though our articles are publicly available, they're still copyrighted to us. You had no right to use it. And assuming all of these actual valuable content providers or information providers are going to put everything behind a firewall or paywall, who is going to win the competition? How could a startup have access to that information to build their specialty model to compete?
I'll take that. So there's, and I'm going to try to answer in steps. Step number one is we keep thinking about LLM and what's, just the immediate impact. I want to move the direction in what all that has not been thought about. So connected devices. So an open interpreter. I feel like the world is heading towards.
Do you mind actually like giving us a few lines what open interpreter
is?
is?
So open interpreter is basically a product in which you can speak to. And it will do, so you're connecting hardware to software, to conversation. So you will tell the open interpreter, send a Slack message. So pretty much you would try to do with Siri, send a message to my wife, and like all the things that would follow.
Except like a million times
Yes.
smarter than
Yes.
Siri, and it's as if you have a smart person sitting behind your laptop, and you can tell them do whatever is possible to do on a laptop.
Exactly. So I want to go even further. So I'm going to ask a question. Is how many of you are data scientists over here, or been working as a data scientist? So let's say there are 5-6 people. Have you ever paid for scikit? Have you ever paid for linear regression model? Have you ever paid for LGBM model? You've never done that, right? And you've just downloaded it over and over again. I think we can say that the foundation models exist. We can't fight them, but what we can do is create synthetic data. And that synthetic data can help us fine-tune our LLM to a use case. So if in an organization you use models for forecasting, you use models for recommendation systems, you use models for a lot of different things. Similarly, we'll use LLMs or multimodal architecture for building products that we have not thought about yet, or even our recommendation system will start using them. And I think that's what we want to go towards. You mentioned there'll be a new set of jobs. I feel these are the jobs that are coming up. Companies will require you to build a recommendation system using an LLM, or companies will require, like, it helps with cold start problem. Any one of you have worked on a cold start problem is like, I don't have enough data about my user. How do I start working with them? So I feel like the data part has been addressed in the sense that there will be paywalls. Yes, data is the oil, and I still believe. And I'll give you an example. Try reading a 10K into an LLM. If anybody have ever tried trying to push an LLM 10K into an LLM, good luck. Because what happens is that there are a lot of charts. There's a 150-page PDF document. If you try chunking it, like the most famous LangChain thing, you try chunking it, it won't work. You try to push all the data into it, the context window is too long. So it's, while we talk about all big game about OpenAI and all these things, a 10K is not readable. You have to spend hours trying to figure that out, and you will eventually. So I feel like we need to sort of start working towards the application side of what all can I build on my existing applications that empowers us through multimodal architectures. One of them, I believe, will be, like replacing Siri, replacing Google Assistant, to actually, hey, can you start my car? Can you get my car over here? Can you turn on the lights at my home? Or to, the most cynical Black Mirror episode, where you take out a personality out of a chip, which is you, and it runs your life because it knows all your passwords. It knows what your habits are. I feel like that's I would love for the world to head towards that manner, because we can talk about data all day, but these models have been trained and no one's going to come for them. OpenAI has so much money, they're going to buy New York Times and they're going to just put everything for free. Right? So I think these paywalls, they're going to be addressed very, very quickly. We need to get into application building, which is beyond wrapper. Like, all of us are like, I have a great idea. I thought about it last night. I'm going to recommend you the best bakery stuff that you can make using ChatGPT. And guess what? 600 other people have thought of the same idea. But just because you're in Silicon Valley, you'll have a VC who will come and say, hey, here's $2 million. Go ahead and build it out.
Any?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a couple of thoughts. There's, one part of what you mentioned was having specialized applications. And I actually think that reduces the value of a product to some extent. One of the reasons why I think ChatGPT was so wildly successful was, you type whatever you want in there and you get something that seems fairly reasonable out. And so it's in any arbitrary domain. If you think about intelligence, right? Like, maybe I'm a reasonable engineer, but I'm a terrible doctor, right? But ChatGPT is a pretty good kind of everything. And so if you think about the intelligence of that kind of product, it's probably on average more intelligent than all of us, on average. It's just in certain domains, maybe not so much, that you might be an expert in. And so I think that's part of the beauty of it. That's part of the value of it. And so I'd like to be in a world where, and you mentioned this later on, where you said, hey, I'd like to be in a world where you can do absolutely anything with the system. I totally agree. But then when it comes to specialized data in the 10K example, that's a very nuanced, that's a very niche, that's a very specific problem. And I don't know that we should be building those kinds of products anymore. I actually think that we should be building more open world, open-ended systems, because we now actually have the capability to do something like that. And so it's totally fair to say, hey, look, I'm going to go and solve this one business problem. And then, it turns into, and in that one specific business problem, you can do pretty much anything you want to.
So we are kind of going back to the conversations we had before. And then, I mentioned it briefly, like pretty soon the cost of software, as Hadi has said, is going to drop to zero, right? When theoretically speaking, you can talk to an app and it can create anything you ask it for in the next 6 months to 2 years. all you're paying for is maybe subscription for that Devin model, or like we are paying right now $20 for or ChatGPT or whatever other LLM you're paying for. So what would be the implication of that? And then when there's no barrier to entry, anybody can do it. What is the moat? Are we entering a time that actually there is no moat? And on top of that, you know, I sometimes say this, that, you know, for the first time in the history, I think startups are late to market because incumbents and big companies have the IP, they have the data, they have the access, and like, how could startups theoretically build something to compete? And in that scenario, even if like startups should be encouraged to build a, you know, very generic and multi-application, then, you know, even less so, they could build a moat, at least the way I understand it. But so what is a moat for a startup?
I mean, I personally feel like moats get developed over time. And, you know, no business typically so there are very few examples where you start with a moat. You might have, you know, maybe an incredible researcher who's come up with something that's outstanding, but we also live in a time where research is collaborative, right? So it's very hard to be completely isolated from the rest of the scientific community. So even those kinds of things don't really happen as much anymore. So if you're in a world where everyone kind of is building in sort of the same area, you develop your moat over time by having good product market fit, by having by solving a real world problem, by delivering value. And then, you know, you have like $100 billion sitting in the bank if you're a big tech company. And that was a moat built over decades.
Yeah, and I want to just add on to Databricks. Google could have always matched up to that. Snowflake, Google could have always gone there. Google, OpenAI, Google could have always gone like, and I keep saying Google because we are ex-Googlers, so we
are entitled to make fun of it.
I don't know why, but we do. So I think that is exactly what your point. Snowflake is a product that just came up, you know, and
so what was the special, like, explain. What did a Snowflake do? First of all, tell us, you know, for people who don't know what it is, and then what did they do and what did they get right?
I think, and I won't explain. So let me give you another example of a company that I've been working with. And I think this is a pain that everybody can relate to. How many of you are stuck on AWS? Anyone who works
on there? Yeah.
like you feel like, oh my God, this has to become easier.
I think it's great.
Right? So it's great. One person. How many of you have been using AWS for 10 years? 10 years. 10 years ago, it was horrible. 5 years ago, I felt like it was horrible.
Apparently you still think they're horrible.
I started an app engine actually.
But
Yeah.
But I actually do use AWS. And then there are lots of companies that have come up like Replicate. What they've done is that they've built a product on top of AWS. So you don't have to be married to an environment. You don't have to be married to, hey, I just have to be on AWS. I can use GCP or Azure or anyone else. I don't have to go and put my entire infrastructure with it. And those are the new product market fits that these companies are able to derive, is that, are you exhausted with these Azures and AWS and GCPs? And people are like, yes, we are. So they build products like these, which are a little easier for you to jump onto and build your base on. And that's what I'm seeing, which makes it easier for you. Hugging Face. I don't know how many of you use Hugging Face. Hugging Face is beautiful. All it is a great wrapper over AWS, but it is 100x easier to launch a product on Hugging Face than AWS. Why? Because it's just like you have to get into SSH and then all of this, and then you have to be a data engineer. All of the things have been made easy for you. So I think the moat for companies is now becoming easier to work with. And that's where GCP and other companies are struggling to keep up, because they're such large infrastructures. Like a person would be like, I've never deployed on GCP, but you'll more likely find a data scientist like, oh, I've deployed on Hugging Face because I can do it in literally one session. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, another reason I think, so the Snowflake example is also a good one. where it's essentially just, essentially, it's a wrapper on top of multiple clouds. So imagine that you have your data located in, cloud A, B, and C, and you want to have uniform access to all of it, and you don't want to have to write custom code and so on and so forth. Then it's really easy to get access to all of that data across all these different cloud providers. And you might need that for regulatory reasons. You might need that because one cloud is cheaper than another, or you have better data locality, or whatever your business or engineering problem might be. And that's great. Google's not going to go build that. Amazon's not going to go build that. Microsoft's not going to go build that because that's not in their business interest to do so, right? Their business interest is to provide an environment in which you are sticky.
But also those are more like at the platform level, meaning, these infrastructures that suck exist, and the platform level is going to build something that you can choose between different offerings and make it easier for you.
Sure.
But then again, like at the application layer, that you're going to create something, I believe it's really, really hard, or give me examples of really sustainable business models that are building something, an application layer of a generative AI product or LLM based product.
I honestly think it's too early.
Yeah.
I mean,
You don't know yet.
and I think that we're still I think we're all exploring the space. There are so many startups that are all trying in some form or another. Character AI is maybe a good example of this. Massive usage and incredibly sticky user base.
Can you tell us what it is?
Yeah, so Character AI is a website where you can go and speak with virtual characters. These might be anime characters, these might be cartoon characters, these might be real people who might be celebrities, these might be historical figures, and so on. And you're essentially having a chat conversation with them. And,
Is that true that like the biggest audience is also Gen Z more than millennial?
That's right. So it's a much younger audience. Their user base skews pretty young, incredibly sticky, multiple hours per day, average session length. And it's a totally different class of product that didn't exist and couldn't have existed before this. Is it delivering long-term value? Unclear. Maybe it's going to be the next entertainment platform, but we're just too early in the cycle, I think, to be able to say.
And that's part also, I usually say it in a different way, that exactly what you said, that the value in a generative AI product are the type of products we didn't have before. It's like a new class of product. And that's a good example. And then also a tough thing about it is this technological evolution, like every other one, has happened at the beginning of like a new generation coming of age. For millennial was like Instagram and such. And then if 15 years ago, I would tell you there would be hundreds or thousands of people who are becoming millionaire by posting their pictures. You would laugh at me, right? Yeah. And now we have thousands of people who became millionaire of that, right? So the same is like, who knows, character AI, I don't know if there's anyone particular, but maybe they are some of these platforms, I forgot what they're called, that you could get a message from your celebrity, like either they started from the celebrity actually recording that, and now it's like with their avatar or like clone a voice with their authorization. I don't know how character AI are gonna make money aside from subscription, but who knows?
Yeah.
But
It's
again, like a reminder to all of us, this is just kind of like, it's not about agreeing, it's about playing devil advocate also, is it because we just want to practice thinking about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing is in general, like I'm looking at how I use these tools. So typically if I want to start thinking about something, I go to ChatGPT. That's like my scratch notebook. That's where I essentially see my thoughts or like edit my thoughts like in a conversation. So essentially that's my starting point. And then from there I build up, maybe I want to write a code, then I will transition to somewhere else. Maybe I want to do a research, maybe I will go to Perplexity. So at the moment, this is how I use it. And what it actually helps me, it helps me to go from 0 to 1. It doesn't help me to go from 1 to 10, but it helps me to go from 0 to 1. And I think we discuss about this a lot, is that these become, it seems to be very easy to work with them. So they might be something like Excel. Like we all know how to work with Excel. We know all how to work with PowerPoint. These were some tools that they were built earlier, like maybe around 2000, became popular. But then we learned this as like a common tool, like everybody knows how to use them. And starting to work with these tools, you pretty much need to just know English, or it actually works in other languages too. So because it's really easy to learn them, and actually they also help you to go from 0 to 1 relatively easy, and get some ideas, like, maybe I don't know about different intricacies of funding for VCs. I can go and quickly learn over there, or can like prepare myself. So in general, since they kind of moved me from 0 to 1 quickly, I think we have to keep that in our head and see, okay, if that's the case, if that is going to be that, if it's going to be that helpful and easy to learn. So like I think one you were mentioning is essentially it lowers the barrier, like in entry or transition. Like for example, different platforms allowing you to move from AWS to GCP, it kind of helps you to make that transition, lowers the barrier. And I think we have to look at when we want to think about what kind of applications will come in, we have to think about where we can lower the barriers. Is it the lowering barrier for entry or for transition? Or like this would be one way of looking at these, like making things easier. Or the other one is like character AI, as you mentioned. Those are like in the entertainment, a dopamine release. So we essentially go back to all the basic things that we build products on that, and look at how they kind of help us make it faster.
One thing, I feel like there's one thing that's going to change is if I ask you all a question, can you tell me 5 good restaurants in Palo Alto? Some of you might give me, hey, go here, go here, go here. You're not going to give me 1 million links to read, right? This is the truest. And so imagine Google was built only for finding a website. It was never built to give you information. Like you just had to go to a website, so you would use a search engine. Now search is not, it's not a search engine, it's a knowledge engine. And what we are now seeing is that, we have all heard of RAGs and, retrieval augmentation. The great thing is that search is now becoming an intermediate product. So you get these tons and tons of links. And instead of reading through them, you have an AI that reads through them and generates an output for you. It might seem very trivial to you, but imagine, so I was sitting with someone today and he was like, I'm going to Paris. I want to stay near the center and I don't want it to be too expensive, but I want it to be kid friendly and I wanted this and other. And then I actually showed him that a Copilot that we have built that can actually do that for you. So it reduced 3 hours into less than 1 minute. And imagine all that you can do with you'll spend time on Instagram, but basically what you will do is that you will save time to do whatever else you want to do. And that's the power of automation. So this is an immediate effect. All the things you can build on top of that, like, hey, go book that place for me. And that place will converse and then say, hey, negotiate a good price for you. So all of down the line, you're just building out a network of automation, which we didn't have before. That's the benefit.
So kind of going back to the barriers being reduced is, and also usually when we talk about this, there's a lot of time comes up the conversation as, okay, is AI going to put us all out of work? And there's this famous saying that, AI would not replace your job, but a human with AI will, right? And this is like the same thing. Is like when the way you were augmented and you could use frameworks for development that you couldn't use before because they were terrible. Or you could solve a lot more complex problems that it was humanly impossible pretty much to do 3 years ago. For example, at a startup journey, exactly as what you said, I had an example, like when I was working on my startups like 3 years ago, I have all this expertise on about product and a big ego, and then I needed to plan marketing, and I've never really done marketing. But I wasn't ready to go call my marketing people and, tell them I'm an idiot and don't understand anything. So what I did was for 10, 12 days, I studied like 15 hours a day about marketing. The first 3, 4 days was like to figure out what is good, what is shit, because the internet is full of shit. And then after day 5, I could kind of understand which writing makes sense. And after day 7, 8, I could understand where I'm fitting and then how we need to define my area. And then after 10 days, I kind of like boiled it down to 2 kind of possible potential marketing plans. And then I called my marketing friends and asked for advice. Whereas if I wanted to do it right now, what would I do? I'll just sit behind ChatGPT. In 2 hours, I'll ask him to walk me through every step, tell me everything, give me 10 different marketing plans, given my startup is this and that, give pros and cons of each, reduce it to 2. And after 2-3 hours, I could have called my friend, right?
Let me add something to this. I am an engineer. I struggle with sales. So sales is horrible, okay? Going to someone and say, please buy my product is really difficult, right? We engineers love that everything would come to us, especially at Google, right? So what happened is for me, I had no idea how to do sales. Like I don't know cold, I didn't know there's a warm introduction and a cold introduction and, so I started trying, I thought that I could use ChatGPT and there was no information about it because the outreach has become AI driven now. So there are companies that are actually doing that work for you is that you define something like an ICP is, and then you will say that this is the kind of customer I'm looking for. They would search the internet and tell you why this is a great user, a great customer for you. And once they've identified, they create personalized emails for you. That this is the email you can send to this company and this person based on their background. That is something which has not caught up on ChatGPT because the ChatGPT is going to tell me what was the traditional way of doing things. Now we have a newer way of doing these things. And that's what I really love about hustlers is that, people have figured out I can personalize and automate a lot of things. And I'm starting to get benefit out of it. I pay, let's say $500 a month to that service. They find me 20 companies. None of them have signed a contract yet, but they actually get me right potential customers with the right messaging and a follow-up emails on how I should approach them, which I love, right? So I think that's the power of that's the good and the bad because GPT is old. There's older knowledge. It does not have knowledge of these next level things. So that's the difference now.
Any thoughts on that?
I don't know. I recently started thinking about this. I think I watched a video with, I think it was Andrew Karpati. He was talking about token system. And I was thinking about right now we have certain number of tokens in the LLMs that we use and predict them. And I was thinking, okay, 10 years from now, are we going to have LLMs with twice as non-new tokens, essentially extending the vocabulary that, English has a limited vocabulary, but are we going to extend that? And are we going to have different AI models? Maybe like I build a certain new vocabulary that makes a certain type of task easier, and then build AI models on the essentially the synthetic data from that kind of LLM. So yeah, I think the token, that's also seems really interesting.
Actually, on that topic, for many years, the battle and competition was like, how many more tokens can you have, like a bigger and bigger and bigger models? But like at some point, we had like a semi-tipping point of like making it smaller, more nimble, more agile, like edge processing LLMs.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts? Where is it going? Are we gonna is the large, big OpenAI like LLMs gonna win? Are we gonna have singularity that a few really, really big models gonna dominate the world? Are we gonna have the opposite, that actually the world gonna be pushed into like having like millions of different LLMs, that the companies that are building their own foundational model actually have a chance to compete and they win? Are we gonna have a combination of some really big LLMs and some smaller models for special use cases? For example, I had once this conversation with somebody, which was very interesting, saying, LLMs, big players in that field, gonna win any big opportunity that comes. The point I was saying, if like a founder reaches $1 billion market and rapper, the big LLM's gonna take over. What's gonna stop them? And the startup's gonna go solve more of the tail end type of problems that they were not addressing before. because they were not billion-dollar market. And now going back to the 3-founder unicorn, like 3 obviously is a hand-wavy number, whether it's 10 or 2 or 1 doesn't matter. The point is few people, unicorns that have few people, and their secret sauce is they have automated operations. And are they going to, along that line? So it's much cheaper, much faster to solve problem. The goal is not to really reach $1 billion valuation anymore, because up to today, VCs were investing, let's say, in 10 companies or 50 companies, hoping 1 or 2 would reach $1 billion valuation in 10 years. And with this potential of new trend of startups, they could invest in 10, 20 companies, hoping 10 or 12 of them gonna reach 500 million valuation in 3 years, right? Which is a much bigger success and much faster. So the companies don't have to be running after $1 billion valuation anymore. It's like, 300 million is good enough, and VCs are interested because, that whole equation has changed. So what do you think? Are we going towards singularity of big LLMs winning? Are we going through we're gonna have millions of different LLMs, each person gonna either build their own pretty soon? Another conversation is we earlier touched upon it, that, are we entering a world that everybody ultimately and eventually owns their own information, and we have an agent that communicates with the rest of the world? And instead of having inbound advertisement, it's just you decide what you want to see, what you want to buy, and they go and negotiate with different service provider or even retailers. And then, instead of them spending millions of dollars in advertisement, they give you an offer when you have a need. So where do you think the world is going?
I think I'll give you an analogy of cell phone industry. We have Apple, and then we have Android. We don't say we have Google. We say we have Apple and Android. And then we have thousands of companies that are, if not hundreds, they're just building out Apple, cell phones. That's how I see it, because they both can coexist. There could be an Apple-based, Apple-like LLM, like OpenAI. It's a great thing, and it works out of the box. But then if you want specialized things, you can take Android and you can customize it to your own needs. I feel like they both will coexist.
But then what would be the opportunity for the smaller ones to win?
Because
The big ones have generic,
Yeah.
help
So
me understand.
I've given it how we use them.
Hypothetically.
No, I'll tell you how we use them today.
Okay.
So we call them small language model, SLMs. We work with healthcare companies. I specifically work with 2 healthcare companies. They need specific tasks based on that vocabulary to be fine-tuned to get that output. For that purpose, we use the 10 small LLMs, because they want it in a secure environment, and it should not be going out of, to OpenAI. For anything else that requires routing a request, we use OpenAI. So the routing part, the bigger task, which requires you to think more, we use the bigger LLM. But for the smaller things, which are very, very fine-tuned to that task, for example, they have to make sure that the result is always consistent in a certain way. That is where we're using small language models. So a bigger one to help navigate, and the smaller ones to do smaller actions. And that's how I will see that they will work in place. So any large system that we will build potentially could use 2 large LLMs and 20 small models, which you utilize them as workers for specific things, and you will get more benefit out of it. For example, GPT 1.5 billion parameter fine-tuned perform better than 100 billion, because you fine-tune it for a certain use case. That's the power of these things. And we've seen that as an example from working with companies on that.
So what went wrong with so many startups that started building their own foundational model, and tens, if not hundreds of $1 billion was invested in their training, and they were belly up? What did they do wrong?
You don't have to create a foundation model. You have to fine-tune a foundational model. So there's a bit of a difference. You take a Mistral 7B, or you take the 1B or the 2B or something like that, and you fine-tune it to the use case.
And do you think there's a difference if you're fine-tuning open source or actually paying for proprietary.
You should fine tune on open source. It works pretty well. Like these smaller open source models, once you fine tune them, they become really good. Like I can tell you they've become good because we have seen their performance, and in the benchmarking, they've done really well. And fine tuning has also become cheaper. Like, you can fine tune an LLM for $5.
But are we saying we should, as if you want to develop a product, you should not fine tune on like OpenAI, for example, or things that are not open source?
Yeah, so I actually take a totally different view on this. And I challenge this idea. So I actually don't think the analogy between cell phones and between the cell phone industry and the ML industry is a good one. In the case of AIs or ML, you have the more complexity you have, the better your output product is. It scales better with more data. It scales better with more compute. It scales better when you throw more modalities at it. So it's better if you have images and video and speech and text and sensors from a robot and an olfactory sensor and like you can name any number of things, and the more information you throw into that soup, the better it gets. And that's not necessarily the case with a cell phone. With a cell phone, you're cost conscious. You really care about, hey, I want to get this in front of every single person in the world. And if I'm going to go and build a product that's meant for, 8.5 billion people, then you're going to want something that is really small, really cheap, and something that is like crazy expensive because there's some, insane billionaire out there that just wants that like one unique product. And so I think these are actually two very different types of industries. I think there are different dynamics at play when it comes to, how a product gets better. And then on the question of large versus small, I actually don't know that it's large versus small. I think it's a question of intelligent versus less intelligent, right? Like more versus less. And if you can get a more intelligent system with less compute, then you would always take the more intelligent system. And so my argument is that no matter what, you want to have the most intelligent system. How you get there is kind of an open question. And I'm actually not convinced at this stage yet. I might come to eat my words, but I'm not convinced at this stage that it has to be a small LLM or it has to be a small number of parameters that gets fine-tuned to build a better product. I think you might be able to actually just build a significantly better product, even in specialized domains with a massive model.
So
You always can.
Yeah.
Right now, the compute is a barrier. Right, at this point,
Sure.
I'm talking about at this point in this,
Agreed.
like if we have infinite money, yes, every time we would use a large model, right? The smaller model is just so that it's economically useful at this point in time. If tomorrow we get all access to, better compute, yes, absolutely.
I disagree with like the more intelligent models would be better actually, because if you take one specific task, like you want to do a research or whatever, you would split into the different steps that you're going to go. You're taking humans out of the loop for many of those tasks. And when you take the human out, I think what is going to be most important is the reliability. And I think if your model is like smaller and customized and very narrow, maybe that will, let's say, if my goal is to just summarize the text, or if my goal is to change the style, if my goal is to find problems in the arguments like fallacies, I would probably want a model that is very reliable, like consistently reliable. And I think if you push too many things into one model, it's like when you have more intelligent, your brain just goes all directions. But when you're actually stupid, like in one like narrow, like in one area, and you say, okay, I will take this and it will take do that. For big workflows, that is going to be very important, because if every one of those steps are a little bit unreliable,
I guess
then
the
it adds up
conversation
in
is
a like
even
a,
today's workforce, we have blue collar worker, we have white collar worker, we have entry level worker, we have advanced level worker, we have like good engineers, we have 10x engineers, right? So it depends on like how to distribute the task and what to assign for it. And one of the biggest opportunities, if anybody wants an inspiration for a startup, is actually to creating the model of how to distribute this. So if big enterprises have big challenges for automating process, to actually knowing how to, there are like a lot of research is done on, for example, if you with customizing the GPTs, with creating inner monologues for it to push it from system one thinking of automatic response to system two thinking of a little bit breaking it down based on like principle one thinking as much as they are capable of. GPT 3.5 could, if it thinks 1 minute before, it's allowed to think 1 minute before it answers, it could up to 100,000 times perform better. So to your point, like slightly more stupider models could perform a lot better if we are a little bit more patient. And how to do it. So my vision is, GPT-5 is, there are rumors about it, and nobody knows exactly what it's going to do, but it's like a very strong rumor. It's going to be a multi-agent platform or LLM by itself, meaning it will break down every task, and there would be different, like right now you could do it manually, create it and then assign different agents and have them do the different part of tasks. Again, advertising, plugging in the training sessions, you're more than welcome to join. And then GPT-5 by default would be that, but probably it's going to be also most expensive. And then if you want to automate a process, you probably need one GPT-5 agent that oversees maybe 2 middle management GPT-4 and maybe 10 to 100 3.5.
Yeah. And I think if you take a like I have a background in one area, so I may be able to take the workflow of that area and put them like in agentic format. Maybe someone else can do it in a different area. But if you really split down those complex tasks to these individual steps, those individual steps, they don't require a lot of intelligence. Are very, I think, if you break down a complex task into like several steps, you eventually end up with very simple, transformations of the text. I think, yeah, we need like reasoning capabilities, but they appeared in models way earlier, and you probably don't need reasoning for. It's hard to say, but like maybe 90% of the tasks that you would do with LLMs.
What do you guys think?
I think it all comes down to ROI. It's all amazing to experiment. It's all great, but literally we get asked, what is the cost per query? How much are you spending? How much time? And we have to push it. We have to push, like, basically, another large company that we work with, they question us, how much is this going to cost us per query level?
Yeah.
How many customers can we convert? And that is I might be cynical because I have to answer that question, but that's a question. Like, they take infrastructure into equation, and they look at token, like, can you put a smaller model just because if you spend 2 cents or $2 per query to show a set of results, are you getting that money back from your customer in any form without showing ads? That's a big question for companies. It's a very, very big question. And eventually, I think that's where the future will have LLM engineers who will build these models, because right now search is very cheap. It costs very little money for a company to run search. Why isn't every company doing an LLM based search? Because it costs money to run these products. And it's not like 10, they get millions of queries per day. That becomes $1 million spend that they didn't have previously. Because per query is almost negligible cost. You're just paying for the service, but now you're paying for the tokens. And if you host through a larger, or you host by yourself, there are some of the things to consider over there also. Anyone who works for a larger company, they're being asked this question now. What is the ROI for me per query to implement this infrastructure?
Yeah, so I feel like I've heard 2 different arguments. And so let me address both of them, because I think I disagree with both. So the first argument was special purpose systems. And special purpose systems, and if I'm not representing your position accurately, let me know. But it sounds to me like it's you you can do better with a special purpose system. You don't need all that other complexity, and you can sort of narrow the scope of what's possible. And so you get a more reliable system. Is that approximately?
Yeah.
How many people, show of hands, use a handheld calculator? Okay. How many use a slide rule?
And what?
A slide rule. Yeah, what's a slide rule? Exactly. How many people use an abacus? Right? And so my argument here is that general purpose systems, like, everyone's got a cell phone most likely in this room. Everyone's probably got a cell phone in their pocket, right? It's a general purpose thing. You can do pretty much whatever you want with it. And you're going to carry that around more likely than carrying around a calculator, carrying around a slide rule or an abacus, right? Each one of those is sort of a previous iteration of this technology in some form, right? They're computational technologies. And so we basically said, look, I don't need that anymore. I've got this other thing that does that one thing that that previous technology did and a whole bunch of other stuff, right? Yeah, I can do all my calculator work, but you know what? I can actually get a graphing calculator on here. Oh, and I can also plot like entire 3D surfaces, which my TI, calculator is definitely not going to do. And so I think we've shown over time that general purpose systems are so incredibly powerful, and that if we had an opportunity to throw away these special purpose systems, by and large, we would. So then it comes down to the economic argument. The economic argument is, yeah, but it's so much cheaper to just build or to use the special purpose system than to use, for example, a large system that is so general and so whatever. What I'll say is that our entire industry is pouring hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars into more compute, more types of compute. We're seeing optical chips being produced for AI applications. We're seeing ASICs, application-specific integrated circuits, being produced for ML applications. We're seeing a tremendous amount of silicon come online, and everyone who wasn't previously building silicon is now building silicon because of the computational demand. So the question now is, what does that cost curve look like? Where are we on that cost curve? And I would argue that we're still very, very early on in that cost curve, that year over year, you should expect orders of magnitude difference in the cost of training, in the cost of inference, in the cost of production of ML systems. And if that's the case, I don't know that we really have space for specialized systems in the long run. So absolutely, sure. In the next 3 months, in the next 6 months, in the next year, maybe even 2 or 3 years, it may actually have value. But if you sort of, go to infinity, I personally don't see it.
I would disagree completely on your analogy.
Awesome.
Let's start with that. You mentioned, slide rules and abacus. I don't think we're having the same conversation. We're talking about a model which is just smaller in size. And I'm going to try to give another example. You don't need, so let's say I want to go grab coffee. You told me I can walk to Hana house. You didn't tell me take a flight, right? You didn't tell me, hey, you need to call an Uber. You didn't, because I could have done that, right? That's what we are referring to, is if we need to go from San Jose to San Francisco, we'll probably take the bot, we'll probably take a train, or if you're Elon Musk, you'll take a flight. My work as in previous data science also is that this is the same thing that people say, oh, deep learning is here. Why do you use LGBM? Anybody who's worked with tabular data will say LGBM is still the king because it performs better. It's a smaller model, but it performs so much better on the benchmark. And that's a given fact. Similarly, I'm trying to say you can use a general purpose model for a lot of things, but getting that specific use case, because I just need you to summarize this medical historical data set for me, it is much simpler and marginally like 10x better for you to basically build through that. That's the analogy that I'm trying to draw out, because General purpose, amazing these are. But when you need to build for specific, and that's what fine tuning does. You take LGBM models or, regression based models, you fine tune them and then they're hyperparameters and then it works so much better. We don't need, so we don't need one that fits all. We need one that does something and others that can supplement and build a whole infrastructure through that.
So is there any contradiction to say both of them will find their own place? Like there are a lot of things that the general purpose models will serve, even though in your sense that, if I understood it correctly, is like the general purposes could do a lot of specialized things also really well, but there will be some use cases that we really need a very super specialized model and general purpose cannot do.
Well, so even if you take a look at Mistral, for example, and at least they've published the results, some others have not, but these are a mixture of experts. And essentially what you're doing is you're saying, hey, look, I have a model that uses a different, effectively, code path for one particular type of query versus a different type of query. So you're saying, essentially, I'm synthesizing a bunch of experts in different fields, and I'm putting them together in and exposing them as a single interface. And so my perspective is, look, if you had 1 million of those, if you had 1 billion of those, I would every single day go to one of those, because you know what? They might actually have some nuanced information that they can learn from one another that a single, very narrow, special purpose product cannot learn. And so,
I think it depends on what you're looking. If you're looking for very consistent, like similar pattern, like maybe JSON production or whatever, then you would do. But like, I think with what you're saying, like if I want that nuance, if I want that creativity, if I want that multiple perspective that is just going to add something, then yes, I think it depends on what you really want from your model. And like, for example, smaller models might not have reasoning capacity, and GPT-4 has it. So if that is what I want in a specific task, then that's what I would use. But I think it's very dependent on what task you're essentially sending them. So essentially the input, like this is the input, and the LLM is essentially the transform or whatever that takes your input, gives you an output. I think it really depends on what the tasks you want to do. I think they're going to have place for all of them.
I think I'll give you a very good analogy now. Search engines, Google. What we have is we don't have one model that predicts, oh, this is your search and this is the result. We have something called the funnel approach. We have a very cheap model that does a singular job and reduces your space from 10 billion to 1 million. Then we have another model that goes from 1 million goes to 100,000. Then the 100,000 goes to the top 1,000, and then we use the most expensive model, like a GPT-4, let's say, which is the best model for the least amount of things. And that is how it has helped us keep the cost low. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about ROI. Keep the cost low, but it's able to efficiently move through the process. Any system design person, like you will speak to, they will talk to you about that infrastructure approach of funneling approach for modeling, because it helps you go through billions of combinations and reduce this. Like you always will use the best model.
Again, this does make sense in that like cost of workforce that we discussed, right? Like the footwork is with the cheapest of models, and then you have a few middle management and even fewer top executives, because they literally cost a lot more.
Yeah. So let's say you're sitting here, you're using your phone. In order to speak to them, you're not using your phone, right?
Yeah.
You can use your phone.
Yeah.
You don't want to. You're like, I'm here. I can speak to him, and I speak to him and speak to me right in front. That's what I'm trying to say. It doesn't make sense to use it when it's not needed.
Yeah.
You use it.
So you use the cheapest, most economical, viable.
That's
So
called.
I guess the differentiation is like, would a general purpose model be the cheapest?
Well, I think he actually just made my argument for me. Because you look at Google and you go to Google and they have done this internally for all of us. I didn't have to go and build a first level model that will do, that will filter from like 1,000,000 to 1,000, right? No other business is doing that. Google built the entire system such that it is economically viable and that they have large, they have these large complex models, they have smaller, cheaper models, and so on. And so if I were, for example, an OpenAI, or if I were a DeepMind, what would I be building? I would be building approximately that with my ML models. And I would still continue scaling them, and I would still continue.
That's probably what GPT-5 will do. And it's like we're
Absolutely.
defining that multi-agents, that's like kind of does the cost optimization. However, I think that both of your predictions are correct, but it's like in chronological order. First comes the specialized models, because we cannot afford building all these generalists that perform extraordinary and specific things. So for the next 2 to 5 years, probably we're going to see a lot of it specialized. And then all of a sudden they're going to be platformatized, meaning, all of them are like, they're going to start combining. And it's like, we're really good at this. We're really good at this. Let's just actually push them all to the back end. And then, the surface of interaction, the user doesn't need to know what they're dealing with, just like an all-purpose.
He might actually be correct in GPT-5 being used in 4 years, because GPT-5 might be the simplest model at that point. And then the GPT-10 or GPT-11 would be the, just like iPhone comes out, would be the more complex one. I'm just talking about a theory, the architecture that sort of is taught, and it doesn't have to be always, but when you look at building things, you start looking at it, and that's how we live our life.
Yeah.
We try to take economical decisions. Like as an engineer, I will always look at, what is the cheapest way to get there, right? So that it sort of saves time, and you're like, why do I need to spend so much money for that?
Yeah.
Right, but even going back to your analogy of, speaking with us, of course, you're going to speak with us just over the air, as opposed to a phone or some, satellite communication or something like that. But imagine you didn't have the capability even to call someone on the phone. That would kind of suck. And so the question now is, in my mind is, do you want a model that allows you to talk over the air or over the internet or over a cell phone or through satellite communication or through some, I don't know, whatever other magic? Or do you just want to have a model that's small and can only let you talk over the air?
Yeah.
And, if it were me, I'd choose the one that lets me do anything over the one that's special.
Again, going back to where we started, we're here to just discuss the possibilities of the future. Nobody knows the exact answers. We're just trying to, create some food for thought, and only time will tell. But in the interest of time, before knowing we've been like at it for 90 minutes, I have like one more question. Is like kind of a very big shift. And then there's another question I want to ask, but then we'll check with the audience if they have the patience for it. So one big, very macro level shift I predict is, if you think about between 1950s to late 1990s, maybe early 1990s, the biggest change and biggest industry where the hardware, actually the Silicon Valley was in the full swing, and US government, for example, made billions of dollars of investment in the infrastructure of the company after Second World War. And that was one of the reasons software thrived so much in US, and especially in Silicon Valley, again, because we had venture capitalists that started to build more specialized funds of experts in the field who understood what they're doing and invest in the Silicon Valley of the time. And then we had that infrastructure and learning. When software revolution started happen, they built their specialized fund to support software. There was a lot of expertise, and we succeeded. Now that we are entering a time that there's no moat for software almost, the cost of producing software is gonna be zero. I also sometimes argue subscription models gonna be dead, because if you can create your own app, why would you pay for subscription? And my idea is that would first happen for B2C very quickly, and then eventually also for B2B. So forget about subscription model in a few years, except for those big LLMs and a minimal payment for Devin or ChatGPT. And now one of the biggest problems we have actually is hardware, because in the last 2-3 decades, VC was like really not very friendly to hardware investment. And then we also had a lot of, even chip generation, all of this silicon technologies outsourced overseas. And now we are regretting it deeply and we are going to create. And we are actually neglected also the infrastructure heavily. And now in order to be able to catch up with demand, we need a lot of electricity generation. We need a lot of GPU. We need a lot of infrastructure transform. We need a lot of batteries to save the energy required. We need a lot of transformers to actually like transition that high level voltage to the lower level. So is it actually, are we entering the boom time for hardware again? That there might be a lot more successful or profitable for the coming time in order to create the infrastructure needed to catch up with what we can do with software right now?
I think he said it.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're in this sort of golden era of Silicon Valley again, where, everything, again, from silicon all the way up is up for grabs. So, Intel had been pretty dominant for a number of years, and now we're seeing, startups that are building these like USB connected ML accelerators. And so you can go and put that in your data center, just plug it into like a whole bunch of USB ports, and suddenly, your workloads get a whole heck of a lot faster. And so the fact that there's so much experimentation, there's so much iteration in hardware, I think is a great thing. We're seeing everything from wafer scale compute. So people are actually building entire wafer-sized compute networks. We're seeing optical compute. So the interconnects are no longer just plain silicon, and they're not just, like signaling is actually happening with fiber optics internally within the processor. We're seeing a lot of really good progress on quantum compute as well. And so across the board, we're experimenting with novel methods of computation that we hadn't seen before. And then we're also seeing, sort of the steady march of what's tried and true. So going to smaller process nodes, having more efficient, smaller transistors, more efficient processes, mass scale production, higher yields. And so like, it couldn't be better. It's exciting.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Grok is an example of a company that came out, ex-Google. They introduced TPUs as an inference engine, and they are beating. So currently the fastest is Azure OpenAI before Grok, and Grok has just taken over. Their inference speed is insane. So I feel like we are at the start of something that's going to fundamentally change everything. And that is also making a lot of people uncomfortable because a lot of people don't know what to do. And that's the fun part, because I have students who are way younger than me, and I have all hair, and they know more about LLMs than I do, because they were just born in this. And they're thinking about these things faster and better, because I come with the baggage of deep learning and ML and all these statistical models. They're like, we don't need to know. We'll just focus on LangChain and Llama. I mean, we all know what's up with that, but they are now focused on, hey, how can we improve that? So there's a refreshed knowledge that I really like. It's out there because, like previously you had mathematical people who knew math, and they would talk in Fourier transformers. Then we had ML, who would just talk about ML as statistical models and machine learning, and deep learning came up. And now the LLMs have taken center stage. And I think because we need to make them work, people are focused on building LLM or Gen AI or model infrastructure in the hardware area. And I think they're going to make Google nervous at some point. AWS and Azure nervous. I mean, of course, they're going to be bought out by them. But there will be companies that will build multimodal application layer that is inferencing at that level, because we did not need that compute at that point in time. So the fundamental definition of flops is going to change. And I think content continuum might take a big role in that. I thought content continuum would be LLM, sort of this big boom. I hope that happens too.
Do you have?
I think it's about uncertainty in this space, especially like comparing software versus hardware. Software inherently is just piece of text. And now we have a system that can generate piece of text. Maybe it's not really good now, but typically we don't build business for a few years. We build a business that is going to last for like decades. So it seems that in a decade from now, generating software is going to be somewhat of a free thing. So because of that uncertainty, I think even the money will not easily go into that space, the existing funding. So I think the hardware is going to be, that's why like originally I was also thinking about things in that space, but then I said, okay, it seems that we are in a very uncertain area. And then I tried to look for ideas in like materials, things that are physical so that we can play with that. So
Okay.
hopefully we'll survive that.
So do we have interest for one final question? Okay, so we haven't really talked about this. I haven't talked to any of you. But the question is AGI. I don't know. Do we have to be afraid of it? Is it gonna happen? When is it gonna happen? Do we need to be afraid of it?
You can go first.
Go for it.
I think about LLMs in the way that my brain works. So I don't know about other people's brain, but I know about how my brain works. So from just the abstract level, I think about this as LLMs that we now have. These are just the building blocks. So now that we are starting to go into agentic workflows and frameworks, it is starting to become more similar to the way that my brain at least works that way. So I think essentially the LLMs, maybe the AGI that is we are gonna call it an AGI, it's just gonna be a collection of thousands, tens of thousands of LLMs working together. And as long as they have some form of an internal memory system and you let them to edit that memory system, I don't think it's too different than what I do, because I have memories and I edit them. I recall them, and typically the recall is not perfect, similar to what an LLM does when they recall kind of memory from what they train. So I think conceptually we are very similar. It's just that these building blocks might lead to that. But whether they're going to kill us or not, it depends on what's in their memory. So I think that we have to create good data for them.
So are we gonna be
I mean,
killed by LLMs?
by LLMs, unlikely. Maybe robots. No, I mean, there's no physical manifestation of an LLM quite yet. So like, you put an actuator on there and maybe. I guess my feeling on AGI is if there are 5 people in this room that can agree on a definition of what AGI is, I'd love to chat.
What's your definition?
I honestly don't have one. I mean, I think we have different forms of intelligence. It feels like, what we have in the LLM world is a form of intelligence. What my sincere hope is that we actually learn about what is intelligent, what makes systems intelligent, how to classify intelligence, how to describe intelligence, by going on this adventure of building what looks and feels, at least on the outset, like an intelligent system. So yeah, we have LLMs that kind of seem smart, that kind of do reasoning. What is that? I don't know, but we'll find out.
So should we be scared?
No.
I would just end with this: be nice to technology.
Right.
Do not swear at Siri. Do not swear at Google Assistant. I don't think that. See, it's the fundamental knowledge of what LLMs are. They're just mimic models. They're able to remember what was taught in a certain pattern. They're able to identify patterns of things that have happened before, and they're able to respond based on that. That's all what LLMs are. To what Hadi said, yes, we can use them to build intellectual or intelligent systems that can answer based on certain things to the best of whatever the world's knowledge. It can write a better LinkedIn post with emojis and stuff. It can write, a better essay for you. But it's because of the fact that it has the capability to reiterate things. So I honestly don't, because they try to test ChatGPT on a product, on a knowledge that is never had. It failed miserably. Right? Why did it fail miserably? I'll give you an example of the largest company in the world that was trying to build AGI, inflection.ai. What happened to them? Literally, the founder left and became head of or CEO of Microsoft GenAI. So, and they had one of the most like VC funding ever. They probably raised $1.5 billion. Like, it will take us forever to even count that. Like a human will take forever in their lifetime to count even $1.5 billion. And they raised that much money, and imagine the founder left to become a part of. So there you go. That the models are great and they're going to continue to improve, but always remember they're just statistical models that will predict the cat sat on the mat. That's how it is. But be nice to them. You never know.
Very well. So any closing thought that you want to share?
And I think we don't even have AGI right now. Like even like we are not an AGI. Maybe you're good at something, I'm good at something. But what it feels when using these systems that I become more intelligent in different areas that I didn't spend like 20 years studying it. So maybe we'll all become AGI. So I don't know.
Sidestepping the AGI thing, what I'll say is I think we're actually in sort of another golden age in Silicon Valley. I think we're at a place where anywhere you look, there's opportunity. There's opportunity to build. There's opportunity to come up with interesting new ideas, to experiment and to play. And it doesn't matter where in that technology stack you're playing in. It's ready to be disrupted. It's ready to for new ideas. And we're at a place where we're actually open to these new ideas. And that doesn't happen very often. At least this is, I think, the first time in my career that I've seen this kind of opportunity. And so, if you have the interest, if you have the motivation, go out and play, right? Build.
Yeah. I think I'll just add to this. We all imagine to be AI experts, AI aware. Don't be AI confused. That's what most people are. Like when you speak to 5 people, as you said, if 5 people can agree on a definition of AGI, there's a lot of confusion. And confusion leads to 2 things, curiosity and being judgmental. And we are more judgmental than curious. The best example from Ted Lasso. Because we believe half knowledge is everything we need. And half knowledge is worse than zero knowledge in today's world. Don't think that you know everything. And just be open to things. Just be open to this world, because none of us we don't know what we don't know. If you start talking to me hardware, I will have no idea about it. Right? Because I don't know. So let's just agree we don't know some things. And let's just agree that we're going to learn. I see a lot of leaders making this decision that they know Google. The joke in Google is you can't spell AI without Pichai, or you can't spell Pichai without AI. So this is the resistance I've had with a lot of senior leadership, is that they just believe that they know everything, and they basically push down an idea to you. I'm sorry, I'll finish. But it just comes back down to just be open to what you're learning and ask and talk and discuss before just saying, I met someone, they're like, oh, I'm using GPT as a search engine these days. I'm like, what? It hallucinates that you can't use GPT for search engine. And they're like, yeah, it has knowledge cutoff for 2023. So I'm just finding out, it's a VC. It's a VC. True story, LinkedIn story. This person, I'm so happy I'm using Anthropic and all of these things because it works as a search engine. And just that fundamental knowledge is wrong at so many levels. So we need to work together to sort of displace that knowledge about things that people think they know and actually disperse better knowledge.